We're going to get started. Our first module this morning, of course, was on corporate wellness. This afternoon, we're moving more towards practice development module. And before we get started, I'd just like to remind everyone, please make sure for your CME that you fill out the evaluation form on the speakers. And remember to please turn that in at the end of the day at the table on the back. Also, if you would, make sure your cell phones are muted. We thank you for that. And then finally, we had some questions about power for the laptops. During lunch, they put in power cords. So in the middle of each row, there's a power strip, so you can plug in your laptops. Okay? All right, so we're ready to get started. Our first speaker this afternoon is Dr. Spre. She is a board-certified family physician since 1990. She is in her 15th year as a senior clinical instructor in the Department of Family Medicine at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. She's been practicing functional medicine for over 10 years as the director and founder of the Northeast Ohio Institute for Functional Medicine. She is a two-time graduate of the Institute for Functional Medicine, AFMCP certification course. And I'm very proud to welcome Dr. Dorothy Spre.
Thank you, Collie.
This is your clicker right there.
Okay.
Hopefully we won't have any clicker problems.
Very nice. Well, hello, everybody. It's certainly nice to be here. I'm having a great time. How about you? Are we learning a lot? Did you hear the music as you were coming in? That was my way of trying to get y'all going so that we'd be awake for this part. It's always a challenging time after lunch. So I decided, rather than talking to you about what I do in my practice specifically, I thought I'd take more of a philosophical approach and look at the greater healthcare ecosystem, and we're going to use the perception of systems biology. Now, I heard earlier a lot of you are in functional medicine. I'm curious, just how many people are in functional medicine? So really, 30% maybe. So this will be new for some of you and old for others. I want to start out by talking about an experience that really made an impact on my perception. I attended a conference right before 9/11, and in the conference, the speaker referred to an interview with a leader of a Fortune 500 company, a big owner of a company, and the interviewer asked this brilliant man, she said, "What is the key to your success?" And his response was, "Every day I get up and I go to my penthouse office and I look out over the city and I contemplate my role in the bigger picture, my company's role in the greater scheme of things. And then I turn to the details of the day-to-day operations of the company." And so it's that kind of, all right, here we go. So what I did was, my sweetheart and I jumped out of an airplane just so I could be sure to get the big picture, and I am going to be sharing that with you. I've got to learn how to work this. So our challenge as healthcare providers, as we sit there and look at individuals and their disease, or we talk about intervening in corporations, is really not to miss the cry of our failing healthcare ecosystem. And I think we're all aware that it needs rejuvenation. So I'm going to use this lens of systems biology, and this is the concept of looking at something by putting the pieces together rather than dissecting it into little parts like the old reductionistic thinking or the old paradigm thinking. And Wikipedia defines it as a relatively new field of study. But the key to this field is it focuses on the complex interactions in biological systems. So in modern medicine, we look at the organs and we dissect out the physiology, and we look at the biochemistry down to molecular genetic interactions. But in systems biology, we not only look at the microscopic and the macroscopic, we look at the complex interplay. And for each of us, we each have a symphony of systems that creates our physiology. And it's this perception that I feel is key in the current time as we address individuals. then we take this same kind of individual web and we look at it in the scheme of a greater system. We have individuals interacting with food choices that is regulated by food industry and agricultural policy, and then we have those same individuals in families or societies or cultures. And currently, things like government problems and economic strain are really impacting the individual. And then environmental signals, toxins, pollution, things of that nature impact the individual. And things like living in Cleveland in the land of no sun and being vitamin D deficient, being from Georgia, those kinds of things, those all impact us. And so as we contemplate this greater web of dynamic that affects an individual, we then have a new definition of illness. And this is Mark Hyman's work. You know, illness is an attempt by the body to adapt to a harsh environment as it struggles to survive. And things like toxins in our water, air, and food, unremitting psychological stress, anybody have that? All these things force our biology to adapt through the development of disease. So when we think about an individual, we really have to think about the greater surroundings, and that's what I'm challenging you to do today, is to get a broader picture of what's happening and not get lost in the detail. We're going to be looking at some exciting topics over the course of this weekend. We're going to be looking at expanded tools for healing, hyperbaric oxygen, bioenergetic medicine, body-identical hormones, and novel ways of giving that. And I don't want you to get lost in the expanded tools for healing and not understand the broader picture of what we're trying to do. Albert Einstein says that it's really important that as we look at the problems we're facing, especially in our healthcare ecosystem, that we remember they cannot be solved by the same level of thinking we were at when we created the problem. We need disruptive innovations, extraordinary thinking. And guess what, guys? Guess what you've been hearing all day today? We have been hearing disruptive innovations and extraordinary thinking. And this is the kind of thinking that's going to transform our healthcare ecosystem. So I want to dedicate my talk to the man who inspired me, Dr. Mark Hyman. How many of you have read his editorials in Alternative Therapies magazine? I would encourage you to get online and Google his website, ultrawellnesscenter.com, and read all of his editorials, because he is the modern day prophet for this concept of the dynamics in our failing healthcare ecosystem and how they relate to diseases in the individual. So he invites us to change our discussion from symptomatic or band-aid treatments, not only in individuals, but also in the crumbling architecture of our healthcare model. He says it's time for us to develop a whole systems thinking, and that this is vital for us to create wonderful changes in our healthcare ecosystem that we all are yearning to have happen. But this is going to require that we change our scientific approach. We're not going to be able to use that same old reductionistic view that we've used for so long. We're going to have to move into the field of systems biology. So I had to have a Halloween slide. So what we've already talked about are the webs that affect the individual. But each of us has our own web, our own personal web. For example, I stand at the interface of competing professional and personal needs. I'm a mother. I used to be a patient with chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. My daughter is hearing impaired. I'm an advocate for a parent. I'm an owner of a business. I struggle to find benefits for my employees. I'm a teacher and educator. And so all of these aspects of me impact my individual health, and they also are part of my interface with a greater cultural, economic, and social forces. And unless we look at individuals through this variety of connectedness, we're missing the true dynamic of their health. So let's just take the example that Mark uses in his article, because this is a really good way to look at the misalignment in our healthcare ecosystem. For example, the government subsidizes farmers to the tune of $30 billion a year to grow corn and soy, and that's then used by the food industry for things like high fructose corn syrup and hydrogenated fat. And this makes the wonderful, fast, and processed food that is very nutrient poor, inflammatory, causes obesity and most of the chronic disease. And then to top that off, the government indirectly subsidizes these corporations for another $30 billion per year, which they're able to write off by direct consumer marketing. And unfortunately, this causes cutbacks in things like school funding, and we see decreases in the quality of food in the schools. We see cutbacks in physical education programs. And what happens with all of this? It impacts us, the consumer, and we now have an epidemic of chronic disease. And I think we all know this. Both our children and adults are all suffering from an epidemic of chronic disease, to the point where New England Journal of Medicine said that this generation may be the first generation to have shorter lifespans than their parents. And that's very concerning. And then to top it all off, the government then goes on to subsidize 60% of the healthcare costs. So if we focus over here on chronic disease as healthcare practitioners, and we don't look at the misalignment in the greater healthcare ecosystem, we're missing the boat. We haven't turned off the gas. You know, we're trying to put Band-Aids on the disease without addressing the real issues. And the pearl hidden in all of this is because the government has such a huge financial stake, if we can reach key people in government and change perception with our disruptive innovations, real change might actually be able to happen. So I used to worry about kids on drugs. Now I worry about the new kids on Coke. You know, metabolic syndrome is epidemic thanks to sodas. And we've developed this mindset that we can name a disease and match the drug as though it was a vending machine approach. And these kinds of things really need to change. Concurrent to that, we have Mother Earth, as depicted here by Alex Gray, the medical illustrationist, working very hard to balance our footprint on the earth with our toxins and things like that. And so these are real issues, and I think if we watch The Inconvenient Truth or things like that, we wonder, is Mother Nature poised with her finger on the reset button? You know, we certainly hope not. But Mark says our challenge is really to recognize there is not a magic bullet to fix this, not only to fix the health care, but we can't fix individuals that way either. There are opportunities and obstacles we have to overcome, and we need to move from ordinary thinking to extraordinary thinking. And I think each of you in this room are extraordinary thinkers, or you wouldn't be here. And I think it is through conferences like this that we will create the disruptive innovations out of which our new, thriving, sustainable healthcare ecosystem will form. Now, I think it's obvious that, as we saw this morning, corporations are the window for intervention. They have the financial incentive to do it. And they employ the tens of millions with chronic disease, utilizing 78% of our economic resources. 50% of Americans have chronic disease. And the slide should say 1 in 6 Americans have an impairment from chronic disease. And 2/3 of those are younger than 65. You know, that's really disturbing information. And so we already have talked about presenteeism as being a huge problem. How many of you are employers? You know, and do you deal with presenteeism in your own practices? You know I certainly do. Migraines are a big one. I can't get them to do the food allergy test. It's kind of incongruent. But anyway, corporations do have the financial incentive, and I think we just need to come up with the ideas, whether we go to them or they come to us. And again, we've already seen facts and figures on the numbers that have to do, but we're looking at $18,000 per year per employee of potential dollars that could be used to finance some of these disruptive innovations. So what we have here on the one side are healthcare stakeholders, people like you and me, government, insurers, and what's been happening is we've been going back and forth passing the buck. Okay, we're going to make patients pay more for insurance. Well, we're going to cut back what we give to providers as a solution. Well, we want insurers to pay more, but these solutions are just focusing on a limited problem, and we're not acknowledging the policies that are fueling the conditions. So we can't divorce the two, and hope only exists if we really look at the roots of the problem. We really need to have an alignment in our values, needs, and interests so that real change can happen. Now, the Institute of Medicine created an executive summary called the Crossing the Quality Chasm, a New Health System for the 21st Century. And if you haven't read that, I would encourage you to Google it, because it really is a cutting-edge overview of the issues that we face as an evolving healthcare system. And it's very readable, and it's full of really brilliant ideas. And what they're saying is between the healthcare that we have now and the healthcare that we could have lies not just a gap, but a chasm. And I think as we were listening this morning to the doctors talking about their wellness programs for corporate wellness, one person is trying to intervene, the other they're coming. What we really need to do is bind together and have a disruptive innovation. And that disruptive innovation, in my opinion, is actually a new institution that will rise in our culture and fill in that gap so that it no longer exists. And it will model for healthcare what true primary prevention and the reversal of chronic disease is all about. You know, I have been in this field for a long time, and in the early 90s, when I jumped outside the box and went out into the field of so-called alternative medicine, I was contemplating, how do we make this work? You know, alternative, integrative, complementary, how do we get it into the main conventional system? And the conclusion I came to is that it's going to be hard to change a dinosaur. You know, there's too much bureaucratic red tape. You almost need to build a model outside of existing institutions. And what's interesting about that is it will be a web, a blend of existing institutions. And I think that's what I was hearing Dr. Warden and Dr. Noe say, is that they have all of these qualities in the programs that we offer, that they're offering to corporations. They talk about exercise intervention and education and medical evaluation. They help people in 12-step-like programs where they find themselves connected to something greater that gives meaning and breaks them free of this harness that they're a victim of chronic disease. Why go to a hospital and stay and be sick? Why not go somewhere and stay and learn how to be well? So it would have to have a retreat center type energy, and it would need to model healthy food and provide healthy food for people. At the same time offering all those cutting edge expanded tools for healing that we're talking about, the latest nutrient therapies, hyperbaric oxygen, and all of these things would be available there. I really think the success of what we need to do is to bond together and create an entity that is as big as the modern medical industrial complex is today. I predict that in the next 10 years that what we will see is conventional medicine becoming an acute rescue care center. And a primary preventive institution will be there that deals with most patients before they get to disease. And the qualities of this institution will be education, as Dr. Warden said. We need to educate people in self-care. I tell patients when they come to me, I say, you're in the school for self-care. You are going to learn how to take care of yourself. And we do that by applying the foundations for healing. Dr. Noe alluded to that earlier today. Self-awareness, the ability to understand how your choices affect you. Self-empowerment, the ability to make the choices that honor you. And to create a community to support that transformation. How many of you have patients that are isolated and alone, misunderstood by their families, misunderstood by their doctors? Do you see those types of people? So what we're really creating is a new tribe for people to plug into that validates this journey of self-discovery. So this institution will need to model true primary prevention, and it will do that by screening that symphony of systems for early pre-disease tendencies, the thing that I showed you earlier. And at the same time, our challenge is going to be to educate our cultural system about how the policies that exist now need to change to affect true changes in our healthcare ecosystem. But in order to do this, each of us in this room has to let go of this reductionistic tendency that was programmed in us in medical school. And what's happening is the article that I mentioned earlier, A New Healthcare System for the 21st Century by the Institute of Medicine, they say, quote, "No one clinician today can retain all the information necessary for sound evidence-based practice because science is growing so rapidly in complexity." Each of us, I don't know about you, but I get so many emails and journals every day. How many of them do I get to read? Well, maybe 1%. So we are bombarded by hundreds of thousands of bits of information, and this information is really under these experimental conditions. And as one of the attendees earlier was talking about, well, what about the individual? Instead of the 70-pound or 70-kilogram male, you know, we're talking about individuals here. So just some facts and figures on this. I was astounded. You know, over the last 30 years, increase in clinical trials from 100 annually to 10,000 annually. 49% of that increase has occurred in the last 5 years. That's really a lot of information. So what's happening? We're drowning in information, right? Does anybody feel like they're drowning in information? But at the same time, we're starving for wisdom. And E.O. Wilson, in his Unity of Knowledge, says we need to develop consilience, the ability to link together principles from different disciplines, especially when forming a comprehensive theory. So he postulates that the world will henceforth be run by synthesizers. And that's what I'd like you to all become today, synthesizers, where you're able to put together the right information at the right time, think critically about it, and make important choices wisely. So let me give you the illustration. I know many of you have heard this silly little story about the 3 blind men who are trying to figure out the magical beast that they're touching. And so the guy holding the tail says, "Oh, this is a rope." And the one on the trunk says, "Oh no, it's a snake." And the one holding the leg says, "No, it's a tree trunk." But actually, as the 3 blind men sit there and hold the various parts and pieces, they begin to understand that it indeed is a part of something greater, that they're actually touching an elephant. So functional medicine is the field. It's like a subset of systems biology. And it is the field of medicine that is evolving a new perception of how we view health and disease. And its roots, as I said, are in systems biology. I believe it's the extraordinary thinking. It's the disruptive innovation. It is an institution of medicine committed to science that's rising in our culture. And tomorrow, Dr. Rita Ellithorpe is going to talk about functional medicine specifically as it relates to her patients. So for those of you who may not be familiar with it, it is not a new form of alternative medicine. It is actually a way of thinking, a scientific perception that explains why anything we would choose to do, hyperbaric oxygen, sublingual immunotherapy, body identical hormone, masotherapy, Reiki, the latest cutting-edge diet, food allergy testing, mind-body medicine, it doesn't matter. You can explain why it works through the lens of functional medicine. Even conventional medicine, drugs, and surgery can be explained by functional medicine. So rather than focusing out there on the leaf of the tree like we were all trained to do in medical school, functional medicine says, you know what, I'm going to think about what's in the soil that's feeding that trunk, causing the leaf in the first place. I'm going to look at environment-gene interactions. I'm going to look at how diet, lifestyle, and nutrition impact what they call the fundamental biological processes, that symphony that I showed you earlier. Because it's interaction in those fundamental biological processes that lead to all the things that we are trying to treat in the individual. But rather than doing it through the silos and subspecialties of medicine, we're going to do it by coming back to the founding principles of why it was created in the first place. So as I said earlier, you are a symphony of systems, the psychoneuroendocrine environmental immune system. And tomorrow, Dr. Lavelle is going to take the example of autoimmunity and weave it through its impact on gut and thyroid. So he's going to be applying this systems biology, functional medicine thinking to a major chronic disease. And in the functional medicine model, we have to then acknowledge that disease is no longer an isolated event. It is a late-stage event in a sequence of functional disturbances that have occurred in that symphony over time. So we can no longer think about a disease as an endpoint and just wait till we get there to do something about it. We need to heed the warning of these functional disturbances. So as I said before, most of us were trained to wait till the person's on fire to do anything about it. But functional medicine really is an expert in evaluating these pre-disease tendencies. And that's what Dr. Noe and Dr. Warden were talking about. We're going into corporations and we are intervening in pre-disease tendencies. And that's what employees need. 85% of employees are at risk for disease, and only 28% of the healthcare dollars are being spent in this arena. 10% of the people actually have disease and are consuming 26% of the resources, and 5% of the employees are requiring 47%. So our intervention really needs to be true primary prevention. We need to do early screening for disease, develop preventive services, and ultimately, I believe, and I think we all agree, that personalized therapeutic lifestyle and education programs and interventions are what it's going to take to make an impact on this system. And as we already know, corporations are the most likely window. So there's a spectrum of strategies. You know, if you have disease, you need to be stabilized. You may need to go to the acute care rescue center and have your heart repaired or your cancer removed. But then you can come back, or if you're not sick, you can keep from ending up there. And you intervene with these therapeutic lifestyle changes and what I like to call expanded tools for healing. So therapeutic lifestyle is the key to prevent and reverse disease. So these are just some examples of expanded tools for healing. And you notice in a moment you're going to see I put conventional medicine and drug therapy in there. I think they're just one of the tools. How many of you have been to medical school and have gotten out and been frustrated by your only tool being a prescription pad? And, I mean, I think part of the reason is that's why you're here, is to learn what other tools can I put in my toolkit so that when I address disturbances in an individual symphony, I can stabilize it drawing on some of these tools. But the key for this is that we have to get out of our old paradigm thinking. We can't name the disease and match the drug, and we can't name the disease and match the vitamin. We really need to get out of this old paradigm thinking. Oh, it changed my slide. Oh well. It's no longer an either or. You know, it's not, are we going to use conventional or are we going to use alternative? Are we going to use drugs? Are we going to use vitamins? It's not about an either or. We've got a lot of patients out there. And this is actually, isn't that cool? That is an actual picture of roots on the internet. And that is a pretty complex web, isn't it? And I think, I don't know about you, but I see some really educated consumers who have been surfing that net, and they know more than I do about their condition and all the options for treatment. But let me tell you, they're confused. Wouldn't you agree? They've tried one thing and then they say, oh, well, let me try this and it didn't work, so I'm going to go try that. And they are lost. They don't really know what they're doing, and they need a guide, and they need to understand that it is not a magic bullet. They are not going to find a magic bullet. We as practitioners need to let patients know that they are not looking for a magic bullet. We have to teach them how to use our expanded tools for healing in another way. Our job is to get them to focus within, down to the roots of that tree, how their environment-gene interactions are creating the disharmony in their symphony, making them feel bad. And then guide them to become self-aware, self-empowered, and make them work in partnership with you to create their own unique path to healing. I really think everybody has their own unique path. I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all. I don't think there's one program, and that's what's so exciting about things like food allergy testing. It shows people what they should eat, unique to them. So the most important tool for healing, in my opinion, is to acknowledge that it is a process of self-discovery. And as I said earlier, patients really need to understand how their choices affect them and how can they be empowered to make new choices that really honor who they are and help them to feel better. And this is where the School of Self-Care comes in. And I postulate that it is really the field of functional medicine. Oops, I pushed the wrong button. Thank you for your patience. So it's really the field of functional medicine that is helping us make sense of that confusing and conflicting sea of information out there, by bringing the needs back to the uniqueness of an individual. Our scientific assessment of an individual using this systems biology model will allow us to draw on those expanded tools for healing and apply them to individuals in their own unique way. So in my world, and I believe there is no wrong choice. It doesn't matter. If you need a drug, you need a drug. It isn't an either-or thing. And the systems biology allows us to really target that to individuals. The bottom line of what I do and what many of us in functional medicine do is we help patients understand how, oops, I tried to use the pointer, thank you. How this gentleman, what happened in his experiment that caused him to become obese and develop metabolic syndrome. And if we were to change that experiment and bathe his genes with a new message, we would get a new outcome. And this is really the key intervention that I think the institution will offer to other people. It's our disruptive intervention, therapeutic nutrition and lifestyle intervention program, and it draws on those cutting-edge expanded tools for healing that we're going to be learning about over the next day in this conference. So Dr. Jeffrey Bland, the founder of the field of functional medicine, says the physician of the future will be the specialty generalist who is trained to look for patterns or networks of association among dysfunctions in the different organ systems. We have to look at the mechanistic level rather than just focusing on our diagnosis. And Thomas Edison goes on to say that the doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will interest her patients in the care of the human frame and in the cause and prevention of disease. And I'd like to take that one step further and say that we really need to also interest people not only in the care of the human frame, but in their interactions with their physical, emotional, social, and cultural environment. I think each of us is becoming more than doctors for individuals. That the impact that we're having as we intervene in corporations and with other people is that we are actually becoming healers for our healthcare ecosystem. We are, in essence, caretakers of our world, one individual at a time. And as we heard earlier, at the heart of everything is an individual. As we were listening to the panel discussion, and we were hearing how the impact of one key individual spread like wildfire and changed other people and changed corporations and changed industries. We change the individual, we change everything. So as you go forth in this conference, Keep the perspective, keep the big picture on what we're really trying to do here, and let's bond together and be the movement that creates a new institution in our culture that models for other institutions what true primary prevention is all about. So thank you so much for your time.